Boldwood presents Death at Castle Cove, written by Mary Grand and read by Derryn Edwards. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Prologue. Sunday, the 11th of October. This is a secret place. Safe and cosy by day, but tonight it feels isolated and eerie. Not many people know of Castle Cove. Inaccessible to cars, it is one of those hidden magical places here on the island. Enormous boulders have been placed to protect the land from the waves that crash into and erode it, and yet Colette, huddled among them, appears vulnerable and alone on this cold October evening. Suddenly, her white blonde hair catches the wind. I don't need to see her face to be reminded of how much her beauty hurts me. She is a fool to be down here on her own. However, she is oblivious to the threat gathering in the sea salt air, making it too easy for me. If only she'd stayed away from the island, left me alone with my secrets and my past. But she came, and she won't stop digging until all my secrets have clawed their way out. She has left me no option. She has to die. Chapter 1. Saturday, the 10th of October, one day earlier. Susan glanced at her young lodger as they left the house. Naturally very fair, Colette looked ghost-like today, and Susan was concerned about her. Their cocker-spaniels, Rocco and Libs, pulled impatiently on their leads as they began the steep descent to Ventnor beach to meet up with a group of fellow dog-walkers. It was soon after sunrise, on one of those crisp autumn mornings that Susan loved. "How are you feeling today? I can take Libs down if you want to lie in. You had a late shift at the hotel." "Nah, I need some fresh air," Colette replied and breathed in deeply. "It's so cool I can just walk down to the beach whenever I want. It's brilliant for Libs. She loves it here." Susan looked down at the little black cocker-spaniel, head up and tail wagging in anticipation, and knew Colette was right. "The island suits you both." "It does. I've not been back to the mainland once since I arrived. Sometimes I think I might never leave." Colette gave Susan a quick smile. "Don't worry, I'll not camp out with you forever." Susan grinned. "I've really enjoyed having you and Libs with me over the past few months." "Do you know what I'd really like to do?" asked Colette, her voice quieter, less confident now. "Tell me." "I'd like to study psychology. I want to work with children who have been abused and feel forgotten. I want them to know someone cares and understands them." "That's wonderful, Colette." "I looked it up online to see what I'd need. I managed to get my maths and English at GCSE, and I liked biology. I would have to do A-levels first." "You can do it, I'm sure. I know people who work at the college on the island. You could talk to them. I would support you in any way you need." "Really? You don't think I'm mad?" "Not at all. You're very bright. I'm sure you could do anything you put your mind to. Now, are you working at the hotel today?" "Not cleaning, just the bar at lunchtime. I've got this evening off. By the way, I had a call from the nursing home here. They want me to go up this morning." "Really? Why's that?" "They think they've found Gran's locket." Susan stared in amazement. "Not the one you told us about on Thursday?" "Yes. The gardener found it when he was digging a new border yesterday morning." Susan blinked. "Didn't you say your grandmother died something like 3 years ago? It would be quite remarkable for it to turn up now. But it would be wonderful for you if it has." "Bit of a coincidence, isn't it? You know, it turning up the day after I told our dog-walking group about it." Susan caught the ironic tone in Colette's voice and looked over at her. Sorry, am I missing something here? Colette shrugged. I'll have to see if it's Gran's locket first. Before Susan could ask her any more, she realised they were about to cross the road to go on to the Ventnor beach. Susan, an islander by birth, had now lived in Ventnor for 40 years. The town had been built following the steep zigzag roads winding down from St Boniface down to the beach below. Susan loved bringing her dog down here, either to walk on the beach or along the esplanade from the fishing haven at one end to the Spyglass Inn at the other. Ahead of her on the beach this morning, Susan saw some of the group of dog-walking friends. This small group of friends met up in some combination most mornings. Apart from Susan and Colette, the group consisted of Nicky and Nathan, the owners of the hotel, the Glanville, with their chefs, Tristan and Torry. The only other members were Beatrice, a retired jeweller, and Robert, a retired police officer. Today, Susan could see just Nicky and Torry from the hotel standing with Beatrice. Nicky looked over at them as they arrived and started frantically waving to them. Now I wonder what Nicky is so excited about today, commented Susan. Oh, God. I think I know. Susan heard the tension in Colette's voice, but before she could comment, she saw Nicky was running towards them, hand outstretched. As usual, Nicky was wearing her faux fur coat. Her red hair and voluminous leather bag were flying wildly in the wind. Her docile black Labrador, Duke, followed quietly behind her. What do you make of this? Nicky asked breathlessly. She thrust her left hand in front of Susan. Oh, Nicky! Congratulations! Thanks, yes. We're finally engaged. Nathan gave me this late last night. We've had the hotel for 3 years, and now we're becoming proper grown-ups at 40. I've finally given in to the charms of my surfer boy. The small diamond ring on a thin gold band was far more delicate than any of the garish dress jewellery on her wrists and fingers. I know it's minuscule. Nicky took her hand away. One day Nathan will replace it with a giant ruby or diamond, but until then, this is all I have. It's a beautiful ring. Susan smiled up at Nicky. Beatrice and Torry came to join them. Beatrice was a smart older lady in a silk headscarf, perfect makeup, mackintosh, and hunter boots. She and Susan were both in their early 60s, but couldn't have looked more different. Unlike Beatrice, Susan had simply pulled on comfy jeans and a jumper and thrown on an old parka. Her shoulder-length brown curly hair had the odd streak of grey, and her deep brown eyes now looked out from behind her smart new blue-framed varifocals that replaced the numerous cheap pairs of reading glasses that were scattered around the house. Beatrice leant forward and gently pulled Nicky's hand towards her. She examined the stone in the ring and then, unsmiling, she let go of Nicky's hand. It may be modest, but at least it's a genuine diamond. Nicky blushed. You should be glad Nathan's not embezzling hotel funds to buy me a decent ring. Beatrice pursed her lips. I'm sure Nathan would never do such a thing. You two have a lot more to lose than me if the hotel fails. Nicky turned to Colette. Do you approve? Of course. Congratulations, Colette replied quietly. Susan glanced at Colette and wondered why she saw consternation in her eyes. Beatrice suggested they let the dogs off their leads. Her Dalmatian, Biddy, went rushing off, tearing aimlessly but joyfully about. Nicky's Labrador, Duke, didn't go far, preferring to stay close by. Susan and Colette's Cocker Spaniels ran to join Torry's terrier, Max, and the 3 dogs, noses down, went off to dig holes and sniff out seaweed. And are you going to tell us when the big day will be? Asked Torry quietly, her soft Welsh tones coating her words. Torry was the pastry chef working with her partner Tristan, the inspirational and ambitious head chef at the hotel. Torry was huddled inside a large full-length waterproof, and you could just make out her grey eyes and red nose from under an orange woolen hat and scarf. We're not going to need you to make a huge cake, if that's what you're thinking, laughed Nicky. Susan noticed Torry didn't laugh, but looked down at the sand. "We're not having anything like that," continued Nicky, oblivious to Torry's feelings. "We've given notice to the registry office. We will get married in a month. It will all be very quick and understated. No guests or parties." Susan was surprised at Nicky's plans for such a quiet wedding. Despite Nicky having maintained a pretty cynical view of marriage, Susan had assumed that if she ever did have a wedding, it would be some big, fancy occasion, with Nicky enjoying every moment of being in the limelight. "I know I seem the kind to have a big splash, but I don't want that. I'm getting married because it's important to Nathan. That is all. We'll pop and get married and back to work." "But surely you'll have a honeymoon?" asked Beatrice. "Nathan had ideas of surfing in Portugal, but I told him we can't be taking time away from the hotel at the moment. Now, tomorrow afternoon, Nathan and I are having a little celebration over at Steephill Cove, but for something far more significant. It will be 3 years to the day that the hotel opened, and I expect you all to come. We'll meet at the Falaise car park at about 2. "Is that why you close the kitchen tomorrow evening?" asked Torry. "Yes. We've so few guests this weekend, I've decided they can find places around here for a meal. The B team can cope with providing sandwiches and snacks if needs be. Susan, you must make sure Robert comes." "Shall I ask Tristan to make some nibbles?" asked Torry. "And I could make my pastella stonata, if you would like." Susan recognised Torry's signature dish, a delicious Portuguese egg custard tart sprinkled with cinnamon. "Great," replied Nicky. "And we'll provide the bubbly." She paused and looked at Colette. "You must come as well. You're part of the family now, aren't you?" "Thanks," Colette answered. Beatrice started to walk away, heading towards her Dalmatian, who was trying to pinch a stick off Colette's dog, Libs, and Colette went to join her. Torry, spotting her terrier running into the sea, ran off alone after him. Susan stayed walking with Nicky, whose Labrador continued to be content walking quietly by her side. "Thank you for inviting Colette to the Cove tomorrow," Susan said. "Of course, like I said, she's part of our family now." Susan looked over at Beatrice and Colette, who, having sorted out the dogs, now seemed to be in the midst of a very intense conversation. Beatrice appears to be reprimanding Colette. Has something happened? Nicky stepped closer, her eyes bright, as always, at the prospect of gossip. "Beatrice told me she'd caught Colette snooping when she was there cleaning. I told her not to fuss. I mean, I would have a nose about if I were cleaning, wouldn't you? I know Colette rummages among my things, but I lock anything valuable away or bury it in the wardrobe. Beatrice should just be glad Colette fits her in on top of her hotel work. It's so hard to get anyone to clean nowadays." Susan glanced over again. The conversation still looked pretty heated. "I agree, and I'm sure Colette doesn't mean any harm. I find her to be very trustworthy, and I'm enjoying the company. It's been so interesting. I've never watched much TV, as you know, but Colette has introduced me to Married at First Sight and First Dates." Nicky laughed. "I can't imagine you watching them. It's not as if they're going to talk about climate change or politics." "No, but it's about relationships and how we treat each other." Susan laughed. "And we do enjoy guessing who is going to get together with who." "I'm glad Colette living with you is working out so well. I'm sure it's persuaded her to stay on longer, and I'd hate to lose her now. To be honest, she's surprised me. I know this isn't fair, but somehow you don't expect someone that good-looking and fragile to work so hard. She only came to clean staff and communal areas, and now she covers the bar and the guest rooms if needed. She'll do anything I ask. I am giving her more and more responsibility." "And I know she appreciates it." "Good. And so Beatrice had better not upset her. These young girls can be so sensitive, and Colette could just up sticks and leave the island. You know how severe Beatrice can be. She even frightens me sometimes. I really appreciate her supporting us with the hotel, but I always said to Nathan that I'd not want to get on the wrong side of her." Susan laughed. "I know she can be rather frank, but she's been a good friend to me. And she's been here about 5 years now, hasn't she? Not long in Ireland years, I know, but I think she has tried to fit in. She told me it's been a fresh start for her.
I don't know. I sometimes imagine that if you strip away the posh voice and the headscarves, you'd discover something quite different. Maybe she was the head of some gang in London, planning heists and ordering hitmen about.
Susan rolled her eyes. Honestly, Nicky, I can see why you are so good at acting. You have such a vivid imagination. I don't think a respectable jeweller is going to have that colourful a past. And she does have a soft side. Look at the way she is with Biddy. When Biddy had to go into the vet's for a scan on her leg, she was a wreck. Beatrice dotes on her.
That's what we all have in common, isn't it? We're all dotty about our dogs. Colette and her little dog Libs are so close, aren't they?
Libs is like her family. I have an idea her parents died when she was young. She's only told me about her grandmother, who she used to stay with over here as a child.
Yes, and fancy her grandmother being a resident at the nursing home I worked in. I don't know why Colette didn't mention that before Thursday. I knew her grandmother, Pam, very well. She was a lovely lady, quiet, always so polite.
Oh, something quite intriguing has happened. Colette has just told me that the nursing home phoned her last night, and they think they might have found her grandmother's locket that went missing after she died.
No. Fancy it turning up after all this time.
It does seem rather extraordinary, doesn't it? It would be lovely for Colette. Does Colette remind you of her grandmother at all?
Despite the age difference, I can see a likeness between them. They have that fine bone structure, lovely blue eyes. I could see her gran had been very pretty in her youth. Nicky paused. It's so strange to be talking about my nursing home days. It seems a lifetime ago now.
That's because the hotel is your life now. Nathan and you must be so proud. The Glanville is a real success.
To be fair, it's been a team effort. It was like fate brought the five of us together at the nursing home and gave us the dream.
Nicky glanced at Torry, who was walking towards them, grim-faced and clutching her coat. Nicky laughed.
Well, it might not have exactly been Torry's dream, to be fair, but fortunately she will always follow Tristan.
Torry approached them. I'm going to make a move. I need to wash Max's paws before I get on. It's so cold. I hate the idea of another long winter ahead of us.
Well, we've got palm trees and our own botanic gardens. What more could you want?
Nicky gestured to the hills behind them. Torry glanced at Nicky.
Sunshine? Still, Tristan is settled for now. I have to live in hope. As my mam used to say to me, you can never tell what tomorrow will bring.
Nicky and Susan watched Torry and her terrier walk away.
Blimey, exclaimed Nicky. What's got into her?
I feel sorry for her. It's not easy putting her life on hold for Tristan like this. I wonder why she puts up with it.
Because she is completely besotted with Tristan. In any case, she's not doing so badly. Coming to the hotel has given her huge opportunities as well. She's gone from someone washing up to a pastry chef, and she's good at it. She may have a load of academic qualifications, but she had no skills for the workplace. We've given her a big break.
Susan smiled. I'm not sure she sees it like that.
Well, she needs to wake up and be grateful. As for Tristan, this is going to be the making of him. I always knew he was a great chef. When he was working in the kitchen at the nursing home, he couldn't resist busting the budget, but the food was gorgeous.
They must have been sorry to lose him.
It was pretty obvious he was going to move on to bigger things. If I hadn't asked him to come with us to the hotel, someone else would have snapped him up. Still, I admit it was a blow for them. The home lost me, Tristan and Torry at the same time, and of course my Nathan was their handyman. Anyway, as I said, that all seems a lifetime ago now.
Ahead of them, Colette had called Libs over, and they were leaving the beach. Rocco, having lost his friend, came running back to Susan. Beatrice stayed ahead of them, throwing a ball for Biddy.
How are things going between you and your Robert?
Asked Nicky, grinning. He's not my Robert, Susan replied sternly.
You went to a concert up at Medina, didn't you?
We went with a group to an orchestral concert. To be honest, I'm sure Robert was bored rigid by the whole thing." Nicky laughed.
"Ah, the things men do for love."
Susan gave her a mock scowl. "There is nothing like that going on. In any case, I'm still officially a married woman. My decree absolute is not through yet."
"But you've been on your own for a few years now. You should go out, meet someone new, get on one of those dating sites."
"I will never do that. In fact, I'm not sure I'll ever want to commit to a long-term relationship again. I'm quite happy on my own," Susan replied firmly.
"Good for you. However, I'll be a married woman soon. No more one-night stands for me."
They had caught up with Beatrice, who was putting the lead back on Biddy. "It's time we made our way home."
"You and Colette were having a heavy chat," Nicky said. "What's going on? Were you having a go at her for snooping?"
Beatrice's eyebrows shot up. "Certainly not. No, we were simply talking about possibly increasing her hours. But of course she is doing a lot of extra work for you now." Susan was sure that wasn't true. It had clearly been a far more serious conversation than that. Nicky, however, let it go and said,
"Susan was telling me Colette has heard from the nursing home about that locket that had gone missing. Apparently they might have found it."
Beatrice screwed her eyes up. "How strange. I really don't understand what is going on. Last Thursday, Colette suddenly tells us about her grandmother being up at the nursing home, and now there is all this business with the locket." "It could be that Colette hadn't realised any of you'd had any connection with the nursing home. She has only been here a few months," said Susan. "She knew I went up there with Biddy, and I'm sure Nicky must have mentioned about working there in the past," argued Beatrice. "No, it's strange. She is very secretive. You never know quite what she is going to come out with next. I thought she seemed quite innocent and charming when I first met her, but now I'm not so sure." There was a heaviness to her tone that Susan didn't quite understand.
"That's the problem with people coming from the mainland. You know nothing about them when they arrive. They can spin any old story. Still, we usually find out their secrets in the end."
Nicky laughed as she spoke, but there was an edge to her voice. "But it's not quite fair to assume us mainlanders have the monopoly on secrets, is it?" Beatrice retorted sharply. Susan watched as the two women held each other's gaze, a tight smile on each of their faces, pretending it was a game but clearly deadly serious. She wondered who would break first. The tension was unbearable, like someone slowly pushing a blunt pin into a balloon. It was Nicky who gave in, but she spoke with a forced casualness.
"I think we could all do with going home and getting a decent cup of coffee."
Beatrice nodded but didn't smile. They called the dogs and left the beach together. Susan began the long climb back up to her house, stopping a few times to catch her breath. As loath as she was to admit it, this ascent was definitely getting harder. She would be glad to get home. It had been a strange time on the beach. Usually the meet-ups were pretty relaxed, the usual chat about the weather, their dogs and the like. But today it had been different. Something was wrong. What was it she'd felt in the air down there? Susan paused again and looked down at the beach. And then she knew exactly what it was. It had been fear. She'd seen it in their eyes. But why? What was everyone so scared of? Chapter 2. Later that evening, Susan was standing in her kitchen, looking out of the window at Colette, who was sitting on a seat high up the steeply terraced garden. It was dark, and she could only make out the silhouette of Colette from the solar lights and the burning end of her cigarette. She'd not managed to talk to Colette since the dog walk that morning, and still didn't know how she'd got on at the nursing home. In the afternoon she'd received a text from Colette, asking her if she minded taking Libs out for a walk, as something had cropped up. And then, about an hour ago, she had heard the front door slam. Colette had gone straight up to her room and then out into the garden to smoke. Susan wondered what was up. Colette's dog Libs was out there with her, but Rocco was tucked up in his bed, close to the log burner. He lifted his head lazily as if sensing she was watching him, and she went over, knelt next to him, and stroked his head. Rocco was a sable roan cocker spaniel with speckles of blue roan. She loved his black nose, his gentleness and timid disposition. "Us two are well matched, aren't we?" she whispered. Rocco looked up, his gentle eyes pools of love and trust. "We look after each other." She kissed him on the head, and Rocco let out a contented sigh and flopped back down in his bed. Susan got up slowly, aware that a few years ago she'd have jumped up easily. Goodness, getting older was hard work, and she still considered herself quite young at 62. Her daughter Zoe had bought her some awful yoga video for Christmas, yoga for the elderly. Maybe she should actually try to do it sometime. From the way her knees were creaking now, maybe it wasn't such a stupid idea. Susan realised Colette was still outside and decided she should make a drink and go and check on her. She put the remains of her ready meal in the fridge, and once she'd wrapped herself up in an old coat, she went outside. She carefully climbed the steps. "Are you warm enough? It's freezing out here." Colette didn't reply, or even look at her, but remained staring ahead. "Do you want to talk? How did it go at the nursing home?" Susan asked. Slowly, Colette turned her head to face Susan, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. She moved along the seat as an invitation for Susan to sit next to her. Susan breathed in the cold evening air, looked at the sea in the distance. Tonight, a thick black line divided the sea from the sky, which was full of stars, as if someone had sprinkled a black velvet cloth with icing sugar, and the moon was a clear, bright crescent. She was roused from her thoughts by a slight sniff from Colette. She turned and for the first time saw tears falling, slow droplets of rain down a sheet of glass. One hand shook as she held the thin rolled-up cigarette. The other was clenched into a tight fist in her lap. "Didn't they have the locket?" Susan asked gently. Colette held out the clenched fist to Susan like a child scared to share a treasure. Then she turned her hand over. Susan watched as each finger slowly released its grip until she saw what was hidden inside. The light by the step picked out the glint of a round gold locket with tiny birds engraved on it. Susan gasped. "Oh, they really had found your Gran's locket. But that's wonderful." She looked at Colette, confused. Why was she so upset? This was good news, wasn't it? Colette stamped out the remainder of her cigarette and then carefully opened the locket. "That is a photograph of my Gran, and this is me. It must have been one of the few photographs my mum gave Gran of me. It's lovely she kept it in here, isn't it?" Susan held the locket closer to one of the solar lights. The photograph of Colette's Gran must have been taken when she was in her 20s, and despite the changes in fashion, Susan was immediately struck by the likeness between Colette and her Gran. The photo showed a beautiful woman. Fine blonde hair styled in a short bob only accentuated the fine bone structure, wide eyes, and perfectly shaped mouth. "You look like your Gran." "Thank you. I would love to think that I look like that." Colette's face softened into a smile. "Gran puts her looks down to these." Colette picked up a mug which was on the ground next to her, and Susan smelt warm, rich autumn berries. "Torry gave this to me. Herbal tea is trendy now, and yet my Gran drank it every night, even at the nursing home." Colette looked back at the locket. "Of course, when I visited Gran as a child, she didn't look like this. She was quite a bit older." The smile on Colette's face was warm and innocent. "Coming over here to see Gran when I was very little were some of the best times in my life.
She was kind and gentle, despite her past.
Colette's voice tightened. What had happened to your Gran?
Gran's husband was abusive, and she had a very difficult life with him, but he died young. When their 2 children, my mum and uncle, were grown up, my Gran came to live over here, but they stayed on the mainland. My mum married and she would bring me over to stay with Gran. I loved it.
Colette sighed and looked ahead.
It was bliss. I'd sit on the beach making sandcastles, the sea twinkling. Gran would bring a picnic. She read me stories. She didn't once tell me to shut up. She never hit me, never shouted at me. I believed, she liked me.
Susan found listening to Colette talk as if shouting and hitting were the norm, heartbreaking. It doesn't sound as if your own home life was very happy.
It was awful. Mum had married someone like her own father, and he abused us both. Mum then fell out with my Gran and stopped bringing me over. Social services became involved with my family, and I spent the rest of my childhood in and out of foster homes and in care.
You said you came to see your Gran the week before she died.
I did. Gran was in the nursing home by then. My mum had died, you see, and so I felt I could come over. I'm glad I did. Gran died a week later. At least I saw her one more time.
I'm very sorry your life has been so hard.
You understand, don't you, with all the foster children you've looked after?
Colette took a long drag on her cigarette.
The problem is so many people feel sorry for the abused child, but then we grow up and we're expected to behave like nothing has happened, as if we've learnt all the things a normal upbringing teaches you.
Colette stubbed out the end of her cigarette and pointed to the picture in the locket.
That is why this means so much to me. It was my childhood. That's it. The only time I could truly be a child.
I can understand why it's so special to you. I'm so glad they found the locket. Susan frowned, seeing the tears and anger she saw etched on Colette's face. Is it very difficult, being reminded of the past like this?
It is. But that's not why I'm so upset.
What's wrong then?
I don't think it was just a lucky coincidence that my Gran's locket turned up the day after I mentioned it to our group on the beach. You see, I was laying a trap, seeing if someone would fall into it.
Susan's eyes widened. What on earth do you mean?
You're not going to like this. I am sure now someone in our group, most of whom were working in the nursing home when my Gran lived there, stole her locket just before she died.
Susan blinked hard.
Why ever would you think that? My grandmother kept this in a secret compartment in her jewellery box, with 2 other items that also disappeared. I saw these things the week before she died when I visited. There was the locket, a valuable ruby and diamond brooch, and a children's book she used to read to me. When my uncle went to collect her possessions from the home the day after she died, all these things were missing.
What did the nursing home say?
They didn't know anything about them. You see, my Gran hadn't told them about them when she went in there. I don't suppose they ever imagined my Gran would own something as valuable as the brooch. No one would have checked.
But it would have been sensible to put the brooch in the safe at the home.
I know. But Gran didn't trust anyone, and she was careful. It was a very clever jewellery box. You have to position a carved flower on the top to find the key. You use this to open a compartment in the base. That is where Gran kept her valuables.
Colette put the locket in her pocket and then took out her tobacco and papers, starting the ritual of choosing a paper, adding the tobacco and rolling the cigarette. Only once she'd lit it did she look ready to resume the conversation. So, was your grandmother well off?
Oh, no. But before she married, she worked for a rich family and became very friendly with the woman who owned the house. She gave Gran the ruby brooch and the book. Gran read the book to my mum when she was little, and then to me. I was very upset when I found they'd disappeared.
Did your Gran tell anyone else at the nursing home about her hidden valuables?
She told Alice, her friend, but no one else. They disappeared between the time of my visit on the Saturday and the day my uncle went to collect my Gran's belongings on the Monday after she died. That would have been 9 days later.
Did your uncle report this to the police?
No, he didn't want to. He didn't believe the brooch was real diamonds or anything like that, and so he didn't bother. He had his own issues with my Gran, to be honest. He didn't want to get involved.
I'm very sorry your grandmother's possessions went missing, but I don't see why you are suspecting our friends in the dog-walking group, even if they were at the nursing home at the time. A lot of people would have been in and out of the home in those 9 days.
You're right. However, I have good reason for suspecting one of this particular group. Like I said, when I visited my Gran at the nursing home, she showed me her valuables. As she was showing me them, she told me she was worried. A few days before, she'd come back to her room to find someone from the hotel bunch, as she called them, looking at her jewellery box. Gran said they'd looked very guilty when she asked them what they were doing. I asked her who the hotel bunch were.
And what did she say?
She mentioned Nicky, who looked after her a lot, and her boyfriend Nathan, who everyone liked. He'd put up some shelves for Gran. Then there was the chef who cooked wonderful food, who I know was Tristan, and his girlfriend in the kitchen, Tori. Gran liked her because she took her cakes. And finally, Gran said there was the woman who brought her dog in, Beatrice. Gran loved dogs and chatted to her a lot.
It sounds as if she liked them all. Why on earth does she think one of them would steal from her?
That's what I said. Gran told me she had liked them all before this incident with the jewellery box, but that it was as if she'd seen something very disturbing in the eyes of this person. She told me she would be glad when they left. She felt she'd got them all wrong, and she didn't trust them anymore.
I wonder if she was overreacting a bit? Asked Susan gently.
I thought that, to be honest. I told her to put the valuables in the nursing home safe and stop worrying. However, she told me she was going to get the brooch valued first. Apparently some resident's son was a jeweller.
She wasn't sure it was valuable.
Gran must have wondered about it. After all, if it was real diamonds and rubies, well, it would have been an incredibly valuable gift for her employer to have given her. I think she'd put off having it properly valued in case it was a fake. She liked living with the dream, I guess. And it was very pretty. I can understand why she wanted to keep it with her. It would have been sad not to be able to look at it and remember happier times whenever she wanted.
I suppose that could be true. Susan sighed, looking out to sea.
Anyway, whether the brooch is valuable or not, when I found out about it and the other things going missing when I visited my uncle in January, I knew I had to do something about it, and I came over. I remember Gran saying about the hotel bunch, as if it was somewhere to start. Cleaning jobs are always easy to find, and so I got a job at the Glanville. It meant I had a good excuse to search around, as well as get to know the people. I also managed to get a job with Beatrice.
And have you found anything?
None of my Gran's valuables. I was desperate, and that is why I decided I would try one last thing. I would reveal my connection to my Gran and say I was looking for her locket, and that is what I did on Thursday. Now, I knew this was going to really upset anyone there who had stolen Gran's things. Let's face it, they thought they'd got away with it. My gamble was that if they thought all I needed was the locket returned, and then I would leave everything be, they would return it to shut me up. And I was right. The next morning, the gardener very conveniently discovered the locket in the area of the garden where he was clearly working.
But maybe it was a coincidence, and the locket had been there all along.
No way! No, it was put there the night before, I'm sure of it, and it proves to me that one of those people on the beach was the thief.
Colette sat back, her shoulders relaxed, and she sipped her drink. Susan took a moment to try to unscramble all that Colette had told her. Had Colette really proven that one of her friends in the group had stolen valuables from her gran? It seemed so outrageous somehow. They were all such normal, respectable people. Would they really do such a thing? As if reading her mind, Colette said, "I know it's very hard for you to accept that one of your friends did this, but I'm sure I'm right." Susan shook her head. But why would they have held on to the locket all this time, and where are the brooch and book?
"My theory is that the item that was the most attractive to a thief was the brooch. It was so beautiful and could have been worth a lot of money. I'm guessing the thief took all three objects and examined them later. Now, the book they might have thrown away, the brooch they might have sold, but the locket was more difficult. They couldn't sell it as it was too easy to identify."
So why not throw it away?
"My guess is that it may have been their insurance, something they could use to incriminate someone else if the police had somehow got involved at any point."
"I suppose it's possible. At least now you have the locket. I'm pleased about that. If you think the brooch and the book have been disposed of, I don't suppose there is much else you can do."
"But there is. I have to know the whole truth now."
"But even if it was someone in the group, they're hardly likely to just come out and tell you what they did." Colette took a deep breath.
"I realise that they're not going to own up easily, but I have a plan. If they haven't the decency to own up to what they did of their own accord, I will force them out into the open."
"What do you mean?" asked Susan, alarmed. Colette took a final hard drag on her cigarette, her hands shaking, her eyes wide with fear and excitement.
"You'll find out tomorrow. You won't like it."
"What are you going to do? Tell me."
"No, not now."
"These are my friends, Colette. They are good people."
"Are they? If one of them stole from my grandmother, they are not the respectable person you assume they are."
She heard the passion in Colette's voice, saw the way she clenched and unclenched her fist. She looked so young and vulnerable, a child consumed with anger and frustration. It might have been a moment of madness, something they really regret now. Colette stamped her feet in frustration.
"No! This isn't someone who just slipped up. This is a person who knew my grandmother, knew she trusted them, and yet they were willing to take from her not just money but her most precious possessions, her memories. What kind of person does that? I tell you, Susan, this person is nasty. The more I think about this person, the more frightening I find them."
"Frightening?"
"Of course. Doesn't it scare you to imagine that someone can be this dark inside and yet play the part of a respectable, kind person so successfully?"
"Oh, Colette."
"I mean it, Susan. They are dangerous, and I'm going to find this person and make sure everyone knows what they have done."
A sudden gust of cold night air caused Susan to pull her coat around her. "It's getting cold. Let's carry on talking inside."
"You're right. Poor Libs must be dying to get in the warm."
They got up and carefully descended the steps down through the garden and went back into the house.
"I'm done in, actually. I think I'll go to bed,"
said Colette. "But wouldn't you like to keep talking? I'm worried about you."
"I can look after myself. You're not to worry. Thanks for listening to me. It really helped."
She gave a quick smile, called Libs, and the two of them made their way up the stairs. Susan could see Colette needed some time alone now, and so she went and opened her laptop. There were a few forums she went on, offering advice and support. She also supported some organisations covering a range of things, including women's rights, animal rights, conservation and green issues. Usually, by the time she'd caught up with each, her evening was pretty much done. However, she found it hard to concentrate, and instead kept replaying the conversation she'd had with Colette over and over in her head. Was it really possible that one of her dog-walking friends was a thief, capable of stealing from an elderly woman? It was very sinister to think you could have got someone so wrong. Susan shivered. Colette had spoken with such passion and determination about finding this person. But what were these plans she had? It sounded risky, dangerous even, and Susan was very worried about what the next day might bring. Chapter 3. Sunday, the 11th of October. After walking Rocco the next morning, Susan set about making her Sunday morning call to her daughter Zoe, the deputy head of a large primary school on the mainland. Zoe answered the phone promptly.
Hi, Mum. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How is school?
Manic. Christmas play this year is bigger than ever. My fault, I suppose, but it's exciting. We're working with an amateur dramatic company in town. However, rumour has it that Ofsted is coming in January. They're starting to revisit the schools rated outstanding, so there's a mountain of work to do.
Susan knew it was a waste of time trying to persuade her daughter to work less, and simply made sympathetic noises. Zoe soon, however, moved on to talk about her partner, Faye, who had recently started a new job.
She's loving it, and she has so many perks. Subsidised lunches, gym membership, free yoga classes.
Her job is very pressurised. She's a manager now.
I know, and she's always saying they expect her to be on call 24/7, but I don't see how it's as hard as my job. Still, at least I believe in what I'm doing, I suppose. Now tell me, how is your so-called lodger? Still there, I assume?
Of course, and Colette's fine.
You and your strays.
Zoe, that's a terrible expression.
Only joking. It's good for you to have someone to look after. I hope it's making you cook properly and stopped you just living on ready meals.
Susan thought of the remnants in the fridge, but simply answered, Of course. Actually, yesterday Colette was talking about studying psychology. I'd love her to do some more study. She can stay with me for a while longer if she would like to.
I wonder if there are any charities that might support her. It might be worth looking into that. Now, I was wondering if you fancied coming over for the day on Saturday. Bring Rocco. I miss him. The thing is, Dad is coming the weekend after next, and there is something I want to tell you before I see him.
What's this about, then?
I'd rather chat in person.
Susan was a bit mystified, but she could tell from her voice Zoe wasn't going to say any more. So, you're seeing your dad? That'll be good. You've not seen him for a while, have you? She was desperately trying to keep her voice relaxed and upbeat. Susan's husband, Steve, had left her 2 years ago, and Zoe had taken it hard. As hurt as Susan had been, she'd never wanted to break up Zoe's relationship with her father, and was genuinely pleased they seemed to be getting on better.
Dad has been off sailing with Hester in Spain, Zoe explained. He wants to catch up. Now please, can you come over Saturday?
Of course. Susan heard the doorbell ring at Zoe's house.
Sorry, Mum.
It's okay. I can hear someone's arrived. I'll see you next Saturday. Susan wondered if Zoe was contemplating another move, but she would normally just come out and tell her that. However, as frustrating as it was, Susan knew she had issues she wanted to check up on, and so she opened her laptop again. However, before she could start, Colette returned from her early shift at the hotel. Libs rushed over to greet her. Good morning at work? Susan asked.
Not too bad. Nicky reminded me of the celebration this afternoon.
Tristan and Tori are providing food. I assume they know about your allergies.
I've told them not to worry about me. It's easier for me to cater for myself. You know what it's like. It's not just the obvious things like crab or mollusks, but they cook so much shellfish in the kitchen. I'd prefer not to eat food prepared there. You have to watch out for cross-contamination.
That's very sensible.
I have to be. You know how I love sweets? I've discovered that some have fish gelatine in. That's made from shellfish. I'm obsessed with labels now.
Susan closed her laptop. How long have you had this allergy?
I only found out by accident. I'd never eaten any shellfish really, but then about a year ago we went to this restaurant. I had this awful reaction, anaphylactic shock they called it. It was so quick. It happened there and then in the restaurant. Fortunately, they acted quickly and an ambulance came. It was the scariest thing in my life. I just couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die. Anyway, that's why I'm super careful. I always have an EpiPen with me, although I've not had to use it yet, thank God.
Colette opened her handbag, unzipped a compartment, and took out what looked like a narrow cosmetic pouch made of bright red velvet, beautifully embroidered with gold thread.
A friend gave this pouch to me when I was travelling a few years ago. I can just fit my EpiPen in it. The trouble is the zip is broken, and so I have to use a rubber band to keep it together. I think he'd like me to use it for something like this. He was always looking out for me. He was very special to me. He died, you see, and this always reminds me of him.
Colette paused, looked down at the pouch.
It's a shame it's broken. I reckon I'll replace it with one of those proper medical ones. They are waterproof and everything, but I'll never throw this away.
Susan could see tears in Colette's eyes, but she clearly didn't want to say any more. Instead, she slid the beautiful velvet pouch back into the compartment and zipped it up. Looking up, she spoke in a businesslike manner.
Now, I'm still really looking forward to this walk to Steep Hill Cove. As I've got no work tomorrow, I'm going to stay down late, watch films on my phone in the dark.
You can't stay down there tonight. It'll be far too cold. And anyway, it's not safe.
I'll be fine. I've done it lots of times before, I've just never told you. Honestly, Susan, it's magical down there. I usually walk along to Castle Cove, sit by the rocks, and I imagine I'm a mermaid.
Oh, Colette, you shouldn't be doing this. Not now it's autumn. Colette flicked her hand.
I'll be fine. I just need my thickest coat and plenty to eat.
She took a packet of marshmallows out of the cupboard. They were in a smart white box with silver lettering on.
My luxury. Honestly, they are the best, worth every penny, and they don't contain fish gelatine. Not like those ones up in the hotel vending machine. I have to watch it there. I'm always picking up a packet of sweets after work.
You need more than sweets.
You're a fine one to talk. The only time I've seen you eat a proper meal is when I cook for you. Now, I shall take lots of bread and cheese spread.
Colette filled her bottle with water and laughed.
Us bright young things know how to have fun. Rock and roll.
Would you like to take my flask? Make a hot drink?
No, water is fine for me, honestly.
Fine. And, Colette, she began nervously, those things we talked about last night, the business with the locket. Be careful this afternoon if you do bring it up. People here like you and want to support you. Don't offend them, will you? Colette put her arm around Susan's shoulders.
If one of them turns nasty, I will set you onto them.
She pointed up to a selection of photographs on the pinboard.
Look at you on all your marches and protests, fighting war, nuclear weapons, cuts in benefits. You really were a fighter.
I was, and I hope I still am. But seriously, Colette, this is not the same. And just say one of them did have anything to do with your grandmother's valuables, then things could get nasty. I worry about you. You've got the locket. I wish you would let it be now.
I will be fine. Don't you worry about me.
She kissed Susan on the cheek.
You are really special. And now let me give you a piece of advice for a change. Remember, men are overrated.
Susan blinked. Why on earth are you telling me that?
I know how friendly you've been getting with Robert. And he seems a nice enough guy. However, I'm just saying be careful. I don't want you getting hurt again.
Susan smiled. Thank you for your concern. I promise to look after myself. Now, we ought to get ready to go. Laughing, Colette left the kitchen and went to change. Susan went into the living room and checked out of the window. The sky was crisp blue and the sea sparkled. It was a perfect day for the walk, though on the horizon she saw a few thin grey clouds hovering, waiting. Susan didn't believe in premonitions, but she recognised a feeling of disquiet. Her grandmother had once explained how the barometer in her hallway worked, measuring atmospheric pressure, able to predict a storm was on its way. It seemed to Susan that her body was measuring the growing pressure around her, foretelling a storm. Something terrible was about to happen. But, unlike that barometer, she had no idea what it was or when it would happen. Chapter 4. Susan was glad to get out in the fresh air and breathed deeply as she walked along the seafront with Colette. They climbed the steep path behind the Spyglass Inn and saw the others waiting for them. "Susan!" shouted Robert, her name carrying around the car park. It was lovely to be greeted so warmly, even if it was a bit embarrassing. Susan's parents and her husband, Steve, had all been so reserved. Robert's exuberance was certainly a huge contrast, and she was never quite sure how to cope with it. Robert came over to her. Even in appearance, he couldn't be more of a contrast to Steve. They were both quite a bit taller than her, but while Steve was slim with a shock of white hair and wore glasses, Robert was athletic, had closely shaved hair, and even a tattoo on his forearm. He had his 2 dogs with him. Jem was a stunning liver and white English pointer crossed with a Springer Spaniel. She had short hair and silky soft ears, was very gentle, and loved flushing out pheasants and chasing rabbits. Doogie was a loving, good-natured black Cocker Spaniel with a flash of white on his chest. His coat was like crushed velvet, and despite being 13, he was still very active. The dogs all gave each other a sniff in greeting. "How you doing, then?" he asked. "I'm fine." She looked over at the others and called to Nicky. "Looks like we're all here. Beatrice is going to meet us there."
"Great, let's get going,"
shouted Nicky, and they set out. As Susan had guessed, it proved to be a wonderful day for the walk, which followed the coastline. They started high up, and she noticed the concrete shelter up on the grass where she used to sit with Zoe on windy days. Just beside it, the name Ventnor, made out of white rocks, was arranged on a grassy bank. Susan loved the way Ventnor proudly displayed its name around the town in these giant letters. It showed a pride and confidence in itself. There was a beautiful view down to the sea from here, and then they started the steep climb down. They passed through a metal gate and climbed down some steps before taking some narrower, muddy paths where you could see and hear the sea as you walked. Either side was bracken, hedges with their remaining berries, small trees with their remaining gold autumn leaves. Down some wooden steps to Flower Brook. Susan loved this little park, with 2 springs running into it from the downs above, and home to scores of interesting wild flowers and creatures, the gentle sound of water trickling contrasting with the sound of the waves below. Having walked in single file up until this point, they now broke into small groups as they crossed the park. Nicky walked next to the man who was now her fiancé, Nathan. He had the fair good looks of an archetypal surfer and wore his blonde hair up in a man bun. Torry walked with her partner, the chef, Tristan, an older, much more serious man, with greying hair and a beard. Colette walked alone, while Robert fell in naturally next to Susan, and she started to ask him about his visit to the mainland. "Good. I went to my son's and helped him build a shed, so a productive day away."
"Your children are lucky to have you."
"You spoil your daughter when you see her."
"I suppose I do. Mind you, she would never ask me or her dad, for that matter, to do any DIY. Now, what did you make of the news about Nathan and Nicky?"
"I was surprised when Nathan sent me a text," said Robert. "I never thought Nicky would agree to getting married."
"I got the impression she was doing it for Nathan."
"Maybe she's decided it's time to settle down, fully commit to Nathan." He raised an eyebrow in a knowing way.
"Now, what do you mean by that?"
Robert looked around and grinned. "I'll tell you a bit of gossip. Pete, my mate, who's still in the police force, is a member of the drama group Nicky is in. Now, he tells me that she seems to be very friendly with one of the members. They have a tendency to disappear during breaks in rehearsals."
"Oh, honestly, I can't imagine Nicky having a relationship with anyone else. Nathan is always off surfing, and I've seen the girls who go down there with him. No one ever comments on that, do they?" No, and that's because he's a man and he's allowed to go off and be one of the lads.
Robert laughed. OK, you've made your point. Anyway, they are engaged now.
They are, and they make a good team up there.
They've certainly transformed the Glanville since they took it over.
If Tristan could get this Michelin star, it would be the making of the place and put Ventnor on the map.
Yes. Mind you, the town is changing slowly anyway, isn't it? For the better, I mean. Still, crime, drugs and the